Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you again. I met you in New York at Atomic Studios. We were introduced by our mutual friend, Andy Hong of Tape Op. And we chatted a bit and talked about everything from, I think we were talking about miniseries and things we were binging on Netflix.
Oh, yeah. I think we covered a lot of ground.
We covered a lot of ground, yeah.
Yeah.
And as well as, the world of audio. So for the audience, let's start with the state of the state with you. Where are you at today in your career? What is it you consider yourself? Tell me about all the different things you do, and then we'll, of course, go back to the beginning and investigate where this all started.
Okay, cool. I consider myself many different things. I would say I'm an artist first. I'm also a producer, sound designer, composer, and I'm also a teacher. And they're all kind of under one artistic umbrella. I think over time, I've learned that I have many different parts of myself, and they're kind of all those different aspects of my career.
You mentioned teacher. You teach for Berklee School of Music, is that correct?
Yes, I'm on faculty at Berklee NYC, which is Berklee's New York City campus.
Okay.
It's a master's program.
And that includes the power station, is that right?
The campus is Power Station, which, as you know, is a really legendary recording studio that had become, it was called Power Station and then Avatar, and then was kind of out of commission or semi out of commission, I think. And Berklee and the city of New York and maybe some other benefactors joined together to kind of revitalize it. And that was a couple years ago. And Berklee NYC has been housed there. This is our fourth year.
Okay. As an artist, is it, I know the website is I Am Snow Angel as well as the social media points, but is that also who you are as an artist?
Yes. That's always been confusing that there's the words I Am Snow Angel. But yeah, that is my artist name. I Am Snow Angel.
So you're an artist, you produce, you also do sound design for some companies. Is that correct?
That's correct. Most of the sound design I do is preset design and sample creation for software companies.
Okay.
Like Ableton, Cherry Audio, Output, Splice, Bandlab, a bunch of places.
So the sounds or the presets you create are heard by a lot of people.
Yeah, and used in a lot of people's music, which is cool. And some of it is branded content, so it'll say I Am Snow Angel's collection, on a certain soft synth or whatnot. And some of it is just factory content that I'm in a bunch of people's music without me or them knowing, which is kind of interesting.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to come back and dig into that in particular. But let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lake Placid, New York.
Brothers or sisters?
Way upstate. I have two younger brothers.
What was the upbringing like as it would relate to music or technology in your world?
It was the 80s. We lived out in the middle of nowhere. And we had two channels on the television. So it was a very kind of old-fashioned upbringing. My dad is very musical. He sang with me a lot. He sang me to sleep every night. We sang every day on the way to school. I started taking piano lessons when I was about 5 and continued that until I was a teenager with a couple different teachers. Yeah, technology-wise, I didn't know what was going on. It was like before the internet and living kind of in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know what was happening. I did have this like little Casio keyboard that had pre-made beats in it that I would play along to sometimes. And then I started playing guitar in high school, and I mostly taught myself. And I was always very musical, but it wasn't really on my radar, or maybe I didn't believe that I could have a career in music.
Were your little brothers musically inclined at all?
Not really. One of them is a real fan of music, like a serious connoisseur. And the other one I would say is not particularly musical. He's very smart. He's probably the smartest person I know, but he's not particularly musical.
When did your awareness of the record-making process start to occur? Whether that's recognition of album credits or just fascination with how do they do that? How do they make that sound?
I think I was really late to the game because I considered myself an artist. And I do consider myself an artist, but I don't think I understood that you could be a recording artist and a producer. So I think I mostly fixated on artists, their lyrics, their performance, their delivery. But I was definitely attracted to the sonic aspects of music I was listening to without realizing why. I remember listening to kind of like dreamy, slowcore type music like Mazzy Star and feeling this emotional feeling. And part of that was obviously due to the production and the reverbs and all of the choices that were made in the production, but my mind wasn't there as far as thinking like, what's happening? I just knew I liked it.
Were you experimenting at all with capturing your own creations as an artist?
No, I wasn't. Really wasn't on my radar. It was a long time before I started doing that, really.
When did that occur? When did that awareness of, oh yeah, I can record myself, I can record others?
Okay. So this is the crazy thing. I kind of stumbled into it and I was actually resistant to it, which blows my mind, I know. So I went to college for psychology. And again, I was a singer all through that. I sang in an a cappella group. I played my guitar. Nothing about my musical career would give anyone the idea that I would be doing that as a profession. So after college, I actually went to social work school and got a master's in social work. And I was working in the criminal justice system, advocating for criminal defendants in a public defender's office in New York City. And I was playing in bands and playing open mic nights. And I almost went to get a PhD actually in social work. I got into a bunch of places and got scholarships. I had this intuitive sense, no, like your career's in music. Keep doing this. Everyone in my life was like, what are you doing? You're like, nice voice, you're okay songwriter, but like, so I kept doing that. I thought I would be like this Norah Jones kind of singer-songwriter, but I was very bored. The music sounded okay, but other people were producing and engineering it. I didn't have the vocabulary to explain what I wanted. I was confused because I was like, I know this is going to be my career. This is the place I want to be, but it feels like I'm rolling a boulder up a hill. At one point, one of my mentors, his name's Tony Conniff, he was my songwriting coach and teacher and friend. He said, I think you should start making your own demos so that you have better control over your sound, your songs, your music, what you're telling your band to do, what you're telling producers. And I was like, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to do that. I'm the artist. I just had this really false dichotomy. And I also don't think I knew many women who did both. So it just wasn't on my radar, like the kind of visibility thing. So eventually he was like, meet me here at this time. You're learning how to use Logic Pro. It's crazy. So anyway, he's a good friend of mine and I'm deeply indebted to him. So I started learning and just all of a sudden I just was like, something clicked and I was just up all night making demos, recording things, like just it was all like electronic and weird and like bad because I didn't know what I was doing, but there was kind of like a magic in like the mistakes and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh wow, this is it. Now I understand what I'm meant to be doing. This, the art for me is not just the writing and performing, it's producing it also. So that happened far into my career.
That's pretty fascinating. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it was a bit of a challenge. You had this vision of I'm the artist, I don't do all this other stuff. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you also were starting to go down a career path where you're surrounding yourself with people who are far from musical, people, you're dealing in criminal justice, you're working in the public defender's office. And that is a whole different crowd of people and influences in your life that could take you down a very, very different path. Had it not been for this musical intervention, we may not be talking.
Totally. Because I don't know that I had a viable path to supporting myself as an artist alone. And so I would, in that case, if this intervention and this turn of events hadn't taken place, I'd probably be using my social work degree as a social worker or a therapist or whatever right now. And obviously I use those skills all the time, but they're secondary to music.
So that's a really interesting pivotal moment in your life. So almost like and I hate to use this as an analogy, but it's almost like a drug addict who discovers a new drug. You're up all night. You're like, maybe you're doing meth all night or speed all night, but
yes,
but you discover this thing, and then the problem in front of you is that now and now you have this other possibility. So, how did you deal with that, and how did your public defender life, your criminal justice life interact with this moment? I had already kind of come to a point of thinking I need to get everything going in the same direction as far as my career and how I'm spending my time, because I did feel emotionally exhausted, although I did really like that job and I'm glad I did it. So I was in the process of switching to teaching music, teaching guitar lessons. I didn't really want to stay with that. I was also like tutoring. I kind of grew up as a brainy kind of person academically, so I could tutor, teach SAT stuff, all that stuff. So I'm trying to remember the timing of it, but I had kind of like either made the decision or already made the transition to teaching and doing other things when I really went through this metamorphosis, we'll call it. And so from there, it was much easier. That was kind of like a middle ground. It was much easier for me to transition from there into kind of like a more full-time music life because I was already going in that direction. You start to transition out of the old world into the new world. In the old world, you're probably, and I'm making an assumption here, that you're making a pretty good living.
I will say not really good.
Okay.
Thank God, because that would have been harder too. I was always kind of scraping, like taking these jobs that weren't paying that well. It's like my artist. I already had the artist financial thing of being like, oh, that's good. I'll take whatever you pay me. I would say that there was a couple year period where I did have some grace from my partner and my family and some like leeway. Mm-hmm. But it didn't take, I'm able to make as much easily as in music now as I was in social work. But there was that period of time where it was questionable.
And that is a factor for some people, the golden handcuffs aspect, where you're at a job, you're making so much money that even the concept of making a switch like you were making becomes challenging because you get used to a particular lifestyle.
Right. I really wasn't making much money, and the type of social work jobs I wanted to do weren't really going to pay very much money. People are like, oh, you should go into private practice or do private pay and all these, and that wasn't really of interest to me.
Let's talk about the post-criminal justice world, and how did you start to pivot, and what are the moves you made to establish yourself?
So luckily I had this, as you said, I was kind of like a crack addict with it. So it wasn't hard for me to just kind of obsessively work on music 24/7. So I started making demos and tracks, and I mixed some of them. I had other people mix and teach me. I worked with a producer named Jason Cummings, he worked out of a studio called The Cutting Room in New York. And I learned a lot. I made an EP. I made an album. I realized I wanted to perform it live. And what I was making now that I was producing was much more electronic. It wasn't like, show up with a guitar and play or play with a band. So at that point, I realized I needed to learn a new way of performing. And my manager at the time, Patrick Ermlich, introduced me to Erin Barra. So she worked for Ableton at the time, and she is and was a guru of Ableton and Ableton live performance. And I started working with her one-on-one, and I got really into Ableton for producing and also for performing live. And she knew a lot of people who worked there, so she introduced me to people who work there. I went to this conference called, I think it was called Ableton Loop. I might be wrong, but it was in Berlin in 2015, and like all Ableton enthusiasts were there, or many. And I met a lot of people, including Houston Singletary, who was working in sales, but then later started working in sound design there. He's an amazing sound designer, incredible producer. He and I just became friends, just developed a relationship and became friends. In the meantime, I was, playing out a lot in New York City, and I had like a whole kind of artist look. My hair was really white, was bleached white, was very kind of a snow angel look. And I posted like crazy on social media, hashtagging Ableton and I am Snow Angel and all these things, and just kind of started getting a following. I didn't have any self-consciousness anymore. Once I kind of changed my name to a moniker and started producing, I just was like, I had been really like dogged by being self-conscious, I guess is the best way to put it, up until that switch. And then I really got freedom when I switched to doing kind of everything myself. I started producing for other people. Women started approaching me, female artists, saying, do you produce for other people? I actually started a collective called Female Frequency with some other female artists and producers, and just started networking with other women. So I started getting a lot of experience. And then the sound design door kind of opened when Houston, who I mentioned before, who worked at Ableton, reached out to me and said, would you be interested in designing presets for Ableton? So that was my first kind of sound design thing, was at Ableton. And he was really patient with me. I had a learning curve. I'm very intuitive and I can figure things out. But I came in not know, I'd been kind of making my own presets, and I had developed a sound that he thought people would be into. And so then from there, I was able to kind of get many other sound design plug-in preset design jobs and sample packs. And I love the freedom of making sounds and soundscapes without the pressure of, creating a full song or marketing a song or finishing a song. Yeah.
Very interesting. And in that kind of work, help dissect it for me. And I'm sure it's different based on every company, but is that the kind of thing where you put in the work up front and then you get a royalty on the back end, or do you get paid as you go?
It kind of depends on the project. Some of them can be a royalty, where you get an advance, and then after you recoup the advance, or they recoup it, I don't know which it is, then you start getting paid royalties. But some of them are just a buyout and you just get paid and that's it.
Do they like lay it out and say, here's how much we're paying for this?
Yep.
And you either accept it or not?
It seems like that to me. But, maybe people negotiate. I think that, I'm trying to think if there have been times when I've negotiated. Maybe there have been. Some of it has paid pretty well, and some of it hasn't. And I think that I've taken some things, there's, I don't know if you know this plugin Arcade.
Yes.
It's by Output. It's a really cool sample engine. I just was dying to make stuff for that sample engine and see how it worked and see how my stuff sounded in there, like in the, a finished kit. And also it's a kind of very trendy, hip plugin. So I would have taken that no matter what, probably. There's also name recognition. I've made a lot of audio sample packs for Splice and for Bandlab. And so there's a lot of I don't call it free marketing, but kind of, like there's a lot of name recognition as a producer and an artist that comes with that. And I find it fun.
What you do in all the different things you do, you really practice something that I'm super bullish about on the show, and that is diversification. It's, it's different income streams to make, keep the ship afloat, so to speak, keep your rent paid, keep your mortgage paid, et cetera, et cetera. Tell me a bit about the producer side of what you do. Do you get into the engineering of it as a producer engineer, or do you kind of keep your hands off the console and lay back and, kind of direct the show?
I think both. For my own albums, I now produce just everything at home here, track everything myself. Sometimes I mix, sometimes I don't. So I'm happy producing and engineering at home. When I've worked in a studio, it's kind of been like half and half. If I'm doing something like at Power Station, I would use an engineer because I'm not a studio engineer. But there have been times where I've been thrown into situations and someone kind of just shows me the ropes and I pick it up and I'm fine engineering. There's a lot of things I don't have experience doing, like miking drums and stuff like that. So I'm not like a well-rounded engineer. Mm-hmm. But if the material is like a bunch of vocals and synths and MIDI instruments and a couple guitars, and then we program beats, I could engineer that for the most part.
That's your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So in your own music, mm-hmm. where is there ever a call for you to go to a studio?
So this is kind of branching into what I'm super excited about right now, actually, is that I scored a feature-length film this past year, which, again, I'm diversifying for sure. I had started putting feelers out, letting people know I want to score something, and I'm not in a place, as you know, I'm a parent. I'm no longer in a place in my career where I can be like, oh, let me score a bunch of stuff for free. Like, I just don't have that time or that luxury. But I think the great thing about like building kind of a career with a bunch of aspects to it, and then also building real relationships and real friendships, is that you can diversify more easily. It's not like you're like cold calling people. So a good friend of mine and also mentor named Charles Newman, he was music supervising a film that he thought I'd be good to compose for. So this was kind of one of my more recent studio experiences, and I did use an engineer named Jonah. Oh, I'm forgetting his last name, but he was great. It's a feature-length film. There's about 30 pieces of music. I did most of it at home, but we decided that live strings and some more live guitars, a real piano, stuff like that would be great. I did everything I could at home, and then I wrote string parts, printed out the sheet music. I was very nervous, and we did like a long day in the studio. Getting all that stuff, and it was really great and thrilling.
And sonically, I'm sure just kind of filled everything out a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, it made a big difference because the movie's called The Unexpecteds, and it's actually doing the festival circuit right now, and so it's been amazing to see it like in sold out theaters and stuff. It's a kind of like a dark electronic score is what I made. I kind of made what they asked for, and I had a great time. I loved it. There's also some other stuff, some guitar stuff, all different things. But yeah, adding the string section really like brought it to life, made it feel like more alive. So anyway, that was one. There's also been times where I've been brought in to kind of just vocal produce for someone or support. And those have happened in studios, and I'm kind of there overseeing and directing, not engineering.
Doesn't that coincide with what you teach at Berklee?
Yes. I teach in the fall, I teach vocal production. So it's a 1-year master's program, and our students are studying songwriting and production, and they do have a studio engineering course. So the vocal production course is more about like the philosophy and also getting yourself set up to record at home or kind of wherever, because that is how a lot of vocals happen, especially if you don't have a big budget. So yeah, I'm in the middle of teaching that semester right now, actually.
It's interesting. I've been talking to some, just traditional studio engineers, and we've been talking about the need for social media awareness and self-marketing and the ability to get on a Zoom call and present yourself, et cetera. Mm-hmm. For someone like an artist in back in the day, we'll just use that term, back in the day didn't have to worry about the engineering aspect.
Yeah.
But more so now with the things that we have available to us, like the engineer having to do a little bit of social media marketing, the vocalist, the artist has to take on engineering aspects more so than ever. Totally.
Yes. And I like a challenge. So I'm far from an expert on all of these aspects, but I like that part of it, that I'm pushed. I think anything that I'm pushed to do that I kind of have to do, I kind of am grateful for it. Maybe that sounds crazy.
You have to be pretty damn good at it, because you don't want to be especially if you're hiring an outside mixer, or even if you're mixing it yourself, you just don't want to have to deal with crap sounding tracks. So.
No, you don't. Yeah, it's important for artists. And I think that's, for most artists, they're not going to have the luxury, even if they're like on a label or they have funding or support, of just kind of showing up and being the artist. Like they need to have more knowledge and more skills.
I feel like that's the case across many job descriptions, because we all have to get used to doing different things that maybe traditionally we were not expected to.
It's true. I do hear that across the board. And again, I feel like I'm grateful that part of my personality is I get excited by a challenge, proving myself, even if I'm just proving myself to myself. So I think that's helped me a lot as far as just jumping into kind of like doing everything at once.
When it comes to mentors or just general influences, doesn't have to be a mentor, it can be an influence. I'll pick one out of the hat. Let's say Brian Eno is an influence. Does Brian Eno also influence you in his production choices?
You know, it's funny. I think that I kind of absorb my influences through osmosis. It's less of a direct relationship. Like speaking of Brian Eno, the oblique strategies, those are things that I use a lot. I love that kind of thing, like prompts and open-ended weird questions or counterintuitive suggestions. So in that way, I feel like that's kind of what influences me. I'm also really influenced by artists who are kind of like not classifiable or kind of outside the box. Like I remember reading, what's the name of the book? I think it's called Just Kids by Patti Smith. Oh, she's just such an artist, like just such a true artist who can't really be, she ended up doing music, but like reading the book, it's just like, wow, she's like a just 100% artist. Whatever she was going to do was going to be art. And I kind of feel like that's, those are the kind of some of the people that inspire me the most. Also people like Laurie Anderson, who are just kind of like continuing in their really cool, crazy, interesting work, not pandering or chasing or, just like expressing their artistry.
Yeah, that's funny you say Laurie Anderson, because I was going to bring her up. As I Am Snow Angel, you had alluded to it earlier, said something about posting on social media. You lost all you didn't really care what other people thought. You were just going to post. By having that name, would you consider that an alter ego? I
think so. And I think it really started out as an alter ego. And it helped me shed a lot of my old, we all carry all different things, but I think it helped me shed a lot of fear of what other people thought. But I think over time, it's blended back into me. So I kind of just don't really care as much about what people think. I also think becoming a parent just kind of put everything in perspective, and I just get much less. I'm not concerned about things in general, in both ways. I think just my emotional reactions in general are a bit smaller because I have someone in my life that a child, and I care so much about him, and it feels so intense.
Absolutely.
So yeah, just over time, it's been a gradual process of, having an alter ego, letting that blend back into myself, becoming a parent, just seeing my personality change. It's been very interesting.
Let's talk about that we're both parents, so let's discuss a little bit of the parental impact on our adventures that we do with audio and music. When you had your son, did that really shift your perspective on how you deal with the artist, the producer, the sound designer, the composer parts of you?
I think it definitely made me no longer want to take gigs that I don't either enjoy or pay well, if that makes sense. I think that I just had a habit of just say yes, show up, say yes, do this. And I kind of worked around the clock previously, especially in order to kind of get my skills up in all these different areas. It was just kind of nonstop work, and which was an investment in myself. And I think that's not where I am now as a parent. I'm a bit more thoughtful about those choices. Counterintuitively, I think I thought that being a parent would just I feared it would end my creativity or my career somehow, which I think is why I waited so long to have a child. I became a mom at 40, but that's not true. I made an album that I feel really good about. I kind of like it better than what I made before. It's called Lost World, and it's a full-length album I put out in 2022. I think I just have to work differently. Like, no, I can't stay up all night every night working like the meth addict the metaphorical meth addict that I once was.
Metaphorical meth addict. I love that.
Yes. But, I can't. I have to like kind of be like, this is the time I have to do this. I'll do my best on it. I'll come back and do this. I have to work like smarter. And I actually think that's a gift because I would have just run myself into the ground. I didn't have the discipline to not work like the metaphorical meth addict.
Yeah, I would agree. It makes you use the time you have to work on projects, makes you work smarter, faster, more focused, because you know that, okay, I got 1 hour, I got 2 hours to do this. Let's get in and get it done or get closer to the finish line, because after hour 2, I'm off to pick up the kids.
Right. No, it's true. It's a totally different way of working. Did you feel nervous about it as well? As far as like, how am I going to fit this kind of unwieldy career into these time blocks, or not necessarily?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of conversation with other men about I see them and they're, oh, my wife's pregnant and oh my God, I'm so scared. My world's about to change. You have kids. You've figured out a way to make it work. And I always just say, look, be there, be present. I made some mistakes in that department early on, but have course corrected. But also I tell them, look, right now, everything you do, you think is about you. And your world's going to shift. Your worldview is going to shift to the point where it's not going to be just about you. Mm-hmm. And everything you do is going to affect them. So get used to it, change your mindset and accept it, because, while it has its challenges, as you know, it's one of the most rewarding things I have in my life. And whatever happens in this world, whatever happens with my career, my kids are there. I have these kids. I have these 2 teenage boys that are turning into amazing, amazing young men. And I'm really excited about it. So
you're making me cry. You're making me cry.
It's just it's a very different thing. And if you come from a world of, being self-absorbed, it's a shift. And not to cast any shade, as they say, on our friends and colleagues who choose not to have kids, because it's not for everybody. But I wouldn't trade it for the world.
I feel the same.
I'm going to ask you a question that I already kind of know the answer to. Is there any one of these job roles on the professional side, not on the parental side, but on the professional side, that if somebody forced you to pick, what would you pick?
Okay, it's the thing I'm newest to, but I'd like to compose for more films. It was really very, very exciting, and I loved all of the challenges that seemed like they would be kind of never-ending challenges. But I love the melding of visual and sonic aspects and kind of bringing material to life with music. That
adds a whole nother dimension to the composition part, I would imagine.
Yeah, right. There's the composing, and then, all of these things that I think someone could see them as a drawback, but I thought were really great challenges. Like, oh, here's this really exciting climactic moment, and something exciting musical has to happen at that exact moment. Mm. But the song is at this BPM, and it starts at this spot, and that doesn't. How's this going to happen? So there were a lot of kind of like challenges that were kind of like creative and technical, kind of wrapped together, and I thought that was interesting.
Geek out with me for a minute here and help the audience understand some of the technical part of that, because I think for the most part, we all understand, like, okay, I'm going to make a composition. I'm going to be in whatever my chosen composition tool is, whether it's, let's say we're in Logic.
Yeah.
We're composing in Logic. When somebody says, I want to hire you for, scoring this film or whatever visual media or visual thing it is, do they send you a file that you bring into the DAW and just play it on your computer screen?
So I think part of the reason I got the job was that they wanted a composer they could just send a Pro Tools session to with the cut of the movie and then a bunch of temp music. And I said, sure, send me the Pro Tools session. From there, kind of listened through everything. And then I prefer working in Logic and also Ableton for this kind of sound design stuff. So I exported the movie and the temp music, relined everything up. And I was like, okay, now I'm good. This is going to be fun. This can be easy. But, I was supposed to make the director was pretty attached to the temp music. There were different temp, like library tracks at different spots. But I was supposed to make it kind of like that, but way better, and more interesting. And so I would kind of have some limits, which was kind of okay for me as far as like tempo and feel and stuff, at least to get a piece started. So the challenge I was alluding to before would be that, maybe the piece is at a certain tempo and a certain time signature and something dramatic has to happen in the music at an exact moment in the film. And that doesn't line up musically, as far as where we are in the bar and what the tempo is with where you would musically make a dramatic moment. It doesn't even make sense for something to happen right there. Tried all sorts of tricks, which I found fun, like, gradually speeding up or slowing down the tempo so that I landed on beat 1 at that climactic moment. Or in combination with, having like a measure of 2/4 and then a measure of 3/4 and kind of like piecing it together like a math problem so that seamlessly, musically and visually, the climax would happen at the same time. Yeah. So I did spend, and that got much easier for me. But like when I first started, I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm composing the music. This is really fun. It's like sound design. And then I realized there's so much more to it. And I had a great time, and I have a lot to learn still.
Does your setup at home start to grow as different jobs come in, as the requirements change, or you realize, oh, okay, wait, I need to see, Logic in front of me? Do you have a separate monitor for the visual?
Yes. So now I'm looking at you on it, actually. I have a huge monitor now. And then I have another kind of normal size monitor. And then I have my laptop. Also, just like my synth and controller collection kind of has been growing a little bit because I did do a lot on synths. So yeah, over time, it's expanding for sure.
That's interesting. And then what's the delivery like for a project like that?
As I mentioned before, I did a lot at home, had kind of rough mixes of each piece, went into the studio, added string sections, all the parts I'd written. We added some, my good friend Charlie Rao came, he played a bunch of guitars. I played some more guitars. I did some guitars at home, played a real piano, brought it home. And what I ended up delivering, I don't know if this is commonplace, is that I delivered wet grouped stems.
Okay.
For mixing. So all of my sound design and all my effects and my panning, my creative automation, all of that stuff was baked in, but there was still plenty of, room for mixing, both for the soundtrack and for the actual movie.
Is that sent to the director?
I'm learning so much about this field that I don't know if this is always the case, but I actually sent it to the music supervisor, who lives in LA. And I'm here just north of New York City. And then he did a lot of the mixing. He did the final mixes. And a mixer that he works with, I believe, did the mixes and masters for the soundtrack version. And then he went to the mixing sessions for the actual film version.
Were you comfortable with their mixing decisions based on the goals that you initially had established when you were putting it all together?
Very much so, because I also sent rough mixes of each song to be matched to, because that's in my nature to always give more information and be, I don't want to say more controlling, but more particular about things. Mm-hmm. So there was something to match it to. And yeah, in the spirit of what I did, especially because the mixing was really like kind of levels and mastering stuff. All of the kind of creative effects and reverbs and all that stuff I had done already.
When it comes to the business of what you do, and we alluded a little bit to it in regards to parenting, how we have to be very choosy and a little more targeted with the projects that we take on. How do you approach these projects? How do you approach what you take on as far as like, do you just like say, here's my fee. If you can do that, great. If you can't, I'm not in. I'm out.
Oh, that's a good question. I've definitely walked away from things. I've set my fee and, particularly for things like if someone's like, oh, can you mix this for me? Or can you remix this for me? Like, and I know I'm going to spend many, many hours on it and it's not much money they're offering. I'll say, I just can't do that. This is my fee. When it comes to the sound design and scoring stuff, I think I'm learning. I think I want to be more like, this is my fee and come to the table like not afraid. I don't think that's been my strong suit. I think that coming up as a musician where they'd be like, here's the tip jar at the door. You made like $27. I'd be like, oh, wow, thanks. So I think I'm still really working on that. I will say that, when I've had like salary negotiations at my teaching job or in the times when I have said, here's my rate, I feel very uncomfortable. It's very hard for me. And I'm just trying to ignore that and kind of like put on this hat, like act as if like I'm a business person and I should be. It's okay and it's good to be a business person in my career as an artist. I think for some reason there's some discomfort in blending the two. I don't know. And I've noticed it other people too that, I've hired to do things. They'll be like, well, here's my rate, but if you can't pay me anything, that's fine. That type of kind of attitude that I think, like people, artists and audio professionals being nice people. But I feel like, I don't know. I'd love to hear your perspective on it actually, because I've had a hard time feeling like, super comfortable in these conversations.
I think when I take an I don't give a shit kind of mentality and just say, I would love to do the project, here's what I charge. And it's taken me a long time to get to that point because I've done what everybody else has done. I normally charge this, but for you, and you start to backtrack and I hate that. And I think that my comment earlier about how we all like how some of us have to take on new roles that we're not expected to take on or that we don't really like taking on. I think the role of business person is one of those roles that we all have to take on, and we got to get a little more, not stern about it, but just a little more firm with it and safeguard our time because, we both know as parents, I've heard somebody say, I never work on Halloween because you only get so many Halloweens with your kid.
Totally.
And, you only get so many things like that. And so it's going to take a lot of money for me to, in some situations, to impose on those days. And in other days, it's just like, okay, well, you want me on that day? Yeah, that's a family day. So that's going to cost extra. But if you want me on this other day, here's my regular rate.
Right. That goes back to what we were talking about before, that it really has to be worth our time money-wise. I also think, before when I answered, I don't mind wearing all these hats, it feels natural. The business person hat is one that I'm like, I just like shudder away from, and it's not necessarily comfortable. And I'd like it to be more comfortable.
And I'll try to, this will be, might be a little bit of a stretch in terms of an analogy, but when I go to sell a piece of gear on Reverb, the one thing I always screw up is the shipping. Because I'm always not thinking, it's actually, I'm saying it's going to be 45, but it's actually going to be 85 because I'm not realizing that, I've got to pay the UPS guys at that store to box this thing up. And then it's going to cost a lot of money to get there, plus insurance or the signature and all that business. It's the same thing with if I try to say, well, I'll do a bulk price on something. Let's say, okay, I'm going to charge you a flat rate to mix this. Most of the time that works, but there is the occasional client that is just a pain in the ass to work with, and you end up making less than minimum wage on the project.
I know. I know exactly what you mean.
So, and that applies to all these things like film composition or producing. Like, you never fully know. And I think the final comment on that is, from my perspective, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you've got to pay attention to the red flags that tell you this you should charge a little more for.
Yep. Totally. Because it feels like not self-respecting to be working so many hours sometimes on something, for example, that you have getting a flat fee for. I think one of the reasons I've done so much of the sound design, as far as preset design and sample packs, and for companies, not clients, is that I do think the pay is better in general than I'd feel comfortable asking for from an individual, like an independent artist. Also, it's work that I know how long it's going to take. There are no surprises. And oftentimes, almost always, I submit the work and they say, this is great, thanks. There's not a lot of revisions back and forth. And I can do it on my own time. I can do it at whatever time I have. So I have noticed that I'm making decisions based on predictability a little bit sometimes. Like I know exactly how long this is going to take. And so that feels fair versus it being a wild card that I actually have no idea what the process is how long it's going to drag on for.
In some situations, some might say, oh yeah, in the corporate world, it's different. But I find that it's not just the corporate world that is a little more business-like and thank you, that sounds great kind of concept, but it's also those musicians and artists who have confidence in what they're doing. They're not the ones that are nitpicking like,
no.
Do you think you could pan the hi-hat to the right? It's like, are you fucking kidding me?
I totally agree. And I also will be honest that as an artist who previously didn't have faith in myself and didn't have faith in my music and was meant to be producing, but I wasn't, I have been on all sides of this. I've been the annoying artist. It's embarrassing, but I've been the texting in the middle of the night because I'm so anxious and so upset about who I am and why my career isn't working out and blah, blah, all these things that I'm like, what's going on with the hi-hat, pan it to the left or right or whatever. And it's so funny because it's like, there's like a confidence and like professionalism. And now if I were to have someone else mix something for me, first of all, I have very few notes and I'm careful who I pick to mix things for me. I'm give the person plenty of time. I don't write them at 4 a.m, like all that stuff. And I appreciate the same when somebody doesn't torment me in that way. But I know where that comes from. That anxiety and lack of self-esteem translates into this kind of like really crazed, nitpicky, urgent behavior.
People just, I think they get in their own way.
I know it well because I have gotten in my own way. And I don't really feel like I do now get in my own way so much. That's kind of like, I think, one of my greatest achievements so far is I don't feel like I work against myself and let kind of like anxiety permeate my process anymore. I used to.
Do you think that comes from the fact that you have experience in all these different areas? So you've seen it on both sides?
I think so. Like I know what it's like to be the anxious artist waiting for your mixes to get back. I know what it's like to be the producer or mixer with somebody like breathing down your neck. I know what it's like to actually have a positive experience on both of those sides too. But like I'm empathetic towards all sides. And I also just think I've finally, people said this to me forever, like if the music's good, it's going to be good. Like don't sweat it. And if the music isn't good enough, if the songs aren't good enough and the mix is impeccable, it doesn't matter. The song isn't good. It doesn't sound good. So I think I've have more faith. I think you said I have faith in my music. And I like working with people who have faith in their music too, I think, and intentionality and thoughtfulness and maturity. Maturity, I guess, is maybe part of it.
Yeah, and as you said, you're very choosy about who you pick to mix stuff, which there's an art in that in itself. And you have confidence in them and you let them do their job. And as a result, you get kind of like the group result of the project, and it comes out better for it. Yes,
it's true. And I was not always that. I also didn't always pick the best people. Maybe I didn't really understand. But at this point, I'm actually a pretty good mixer myself. So if I'm having someone else, especially in my genre of music, I'm not a good mixer of all genres, but kind of like electropop, dream pop. So if I'm having someone mix it, I'm pretty picky about it. And I've also done so much prep work and prepared things in a way that I've been told it's very helpful. Like I'm not leaving huge creative decisions up to that person and then getting annoyed at the decisions they make, if that makes sense. I'm kind of like sending a lot of this. I'm be curious actually to hear your thoughts on this as a mixer also. But anything that's kind of like creative mixing, which is really like more production, like radical filter sweeps and telephone effects and blah, blah, blah. I'm just baking that into to the tracks as the sound and leaving it to the mixer to like do the magic of making it sound like a real record. Yeah. Not have to like look at my notes like at this timestamp you should do a filter sweep, but this time, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a little challenging, I think, in the genre of music you're talking about. And sometimes people will say, well, I've done a lot of the work at home. How much should I send you everything dry? And I'm like, no,
not
give me your commitments and your decision making on a lot of stuff.
Yes.
Because that's the sound of, when people just kind of send everything out raw, it's like, well, now all the decision making is in my world and it's going to be sonically radically different from what you expect.
And I don't even think that's mixing. I think that's production. All of those kind of creative mixing choices, I think. I don't know, or somewhere in the middle. But a lot of like what I work with my students on is, like maybe they're not going to be mixers, but knowing how to organize their sessions and bounce their tracks in a way that is pleasant for someone else to mix.
Do you get into remote vocal production or remote sound design? Like if somebody says, hey, I've got this track, can I send it to you? Could you do something magical here to level this up with some ideas? Kind of back to Brian Eno, kind of like Brian Eno was to you too.
It's been more in person, the actual vocal production. I think it's like coaching the person. If I'm singing and adding stuff, then I'll do that stuff and send it all back. So it kind of depends on the situation. Yeah, I do a lot of vocals at home. Have been doing these kind of factory packs for Splice where it'll be like new chill or slowcore or whatever, and oftentimes someone else makes all the instruments and then they send it to me and I make the vocals and send it back. I'm trying to think. I did a vocal production. It was more of a coaching thing in the spring. And we did some over Zoom and then a bunch in the studio. So
for the audience, as usual, links will be in the show notes, but in particular, iamsnowangel.com will be there for you, and any other links, Julie, that you think are appropriate, we'll put in there. But so great to chat with you at length here about what it is you do. Great to see you again.
Great to see you.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. You take care.
You too.